CBT News celebrates 12 years of delivering news, content, coaching, and analysis to the retail automotive community. The strongest team in automotive media, CBT News. You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Fitzpatrick. Welcome into another edition of Inside Automotive right here at CBTnews.com. Big news for car dealers. The U.S. Appeals Court overturned the FTC's CARS rule. But what does it mean for your dealership? Plus, we're also diving into the latest legal issues in buying and selling stores with Len Bellavia, founding partner of the law firm of Bellavia Blatt, also known as dealerlaw.com. Who really knows the ins and outs of all things legal and automotive. And we really appreciate you, Len, taking the time in your busy schedule to join us on the show.
Jim, always a pleasure to be with you.
Yep, great. So
thank you for having me.
Sure. So a lot of dealers out there want to know how you feel about this, and that the laws are passed, all the time affecting dealers. But why is this one attracting so much attention with dealers? And I'm referring to the FTC's failed attempt, I should say, to pass the CARS rule.
I think it's more than just the fact that the dealers, achieved a victory, or the NADA and the Texas Automobile Dealers Association. It kind of goes to the general sentiment that regulators, at least during the Biden administration, viewed business owners and particularly auto dealers. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that the Federal Trade Commission all watched a movie from the 80s. You might remember. It was called Used Cars.
I do remember it.
With Kurt Russell. And it was like the template for the shady, deceptive, snake oil type car salesman. And for some reason, even though that's 40 years ago, that's never left the mindset of federal regulators, at least that particular, trade commission.
Right.
So having, I guess, watched that movie, they decided that they would promulgate a set of rules that really crashed down on auto dealers. They seemingly put it forward as something that was going to benefit consumers. But, just consider the name of the rule that they gave. They didn't give it, the consumer transparency rule or the happy motoring rule. They called it the combating auto retail scams rule. It's an acronym for CARS.
Right.
So talk about, coming to the table with a very negative mindset and a predilection, against the whole process of selling cars, as though cars are not necessities.
That's right.
So that as a backdrop, and it may be because of that being the backdrop, they rushed this thing through, even though it took 2 years and they had plenty of time to figure out if it was being promulgated in good faith, how they could get it passed, through the courts. Instead, they really, I guess the great irony here is the Federal Trade Commission is designed to enforce rules, right? Make sure there's no deception, that the public is taken into account and the rules are abided by. Well, what did they do? They broke the rules. They tried to deceive the court.
Right.
The very agency that's supposed to be, all about being above board, they were about as close to the bottom as they could be. They actually tried to bypass their own procedural rules by issuing what's called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, so that the stakeholders would have an adequate chance to weigh in and offer opinions and maybe, fashion something that resembles a compromise. But instead of doing that, they decided to go right to court and try and get this thing passed after there was some objection to NADA, and didn't follow their own procedure. So instead of putting out what's called an advance notice, they decided they would attempt to deceive the court. Again, the FTC trying to deceive the court into thinking that this fell within an exception to the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, when it did not fall within that exception.
Right.
And the interesting thing about it is you'd say, well, the courts typically try and resolve disputes even before they have to issue a decision. And in this body of law, the court actually had a prescription where they could have split the baby and said, FTC, you didn't follow the rules. However, why don't you go back to NADA and TADA and try and work it out? So there is this conciliatory mechanism within the FTC's own guidelines that the court could have followed. I think what happened here is the court got really aggravated and annoyed at the disregard that the FTC had for proper legal procedure and basically just shut them down and vacated the rule altogether, which I think surprised even NADA.
Yeah.
Because typically, the courts will avail themselves because NADA put forth a very, very compelling argument as to why this whole body of law was totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
So you would have thought that the FTC would have said, all right, they're putting together a very strong defense. Let's see if we can hash this out.
Sure.
But they, guns a-blazing, full steam ahead, very arrogant about it. And I think that really ticked off the court.
Yeah, for sure.
So that they didn't even give them that, middle ground option that they could have. So, in a nutshell, I think the cars rule was overkill. It really wasn't necessary. And if you consider, the victory that the dealers are celebrating and the associations and NADA is celebrating is not that dealership transactions shouldn't be regulated. Of course they should be regulated.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be, with a noose around the dealer's neck and penalizing consumers. I mean, everybody that's in this industry knows that there's a pain point in the transaction process in that consumers really don't like how much time it takes.
That's right.
To choose a car, buy it, and then take delivery of the car. I mean, the industry has been trying for years to simplify that process to address that. Well, in their zeal to really, crucify franchise dealers, the FTC actually lied again to the court by saying, well, these rules, which, it's a laundry list of like 15 things that auto dealers need to do before they can actually give the keys to the consumer, which would add hours. I mean, conservatively would add at least 1 hour to the process. And I think if you had to read all of these new disclosures that they mandated that dealers implement in the sale of a car, and if they actually read them, as was the FTC's intention, it would take 2 to 3 hours additional. It's gotten to the point now where, I do a lot of closings even outside of the automotive space. So buying a house now is faster than buying a car.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And I think it underlines also the need for more lawmakers that come out of the auto industry. Obviously, we saw Bernie Moreno, out of Ohio. I've talked a lot about him because I think we need to see more representation, in our among our lawmakers that understand what dealers go through, and there just hasn't been that over the last, I don't know how many years, but there just hasn't been that. I mean, maybe in the Congress, there's been a number of dealers that have become congressmen, but it seems to me to always be very popular to beat up the dealer and go after the dealer. We saw that, with the Obama administration, with the CFPB and what we had to go through there in the industry. I mean, it just seems to be a popular target, right? It's like, who doesn't hate their local car dealer? Let's go after them, right?
Well, I think Bernie Moreno brings a sense of reality,
right,
and practicality to the process. Because if you think about it, there is really no industry that is more regulated than the automotive industry.
Yeah.
Now, was the FTC, cars rule really necessary? Think about this. The FTC has enforcement power even without the special rule.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't, do the things they would otherwise like to do had the rule been passed, but they still have enforcement regulatory authority. There's the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are state agencies. Every single state attorney general knows all the dealers in their state and regularly takes action against auto dealers.
For sure. We've seen that.
There are regional enforcement agencies. There's Consumer Affairs in just about every county in the country. There's Department of Motor Vehicles that have regulatory and enforcement power and licensing power over and above, franchised auto dealers. There are private attorneys.
Yeah.
There are laws on the books in just about every single state that authorizes the collection of attorney's fees if an attorney proves that a dealer engaged in deceptive trade practices. That alone is a disincentive for dealers to violate the law.
That's right.
And then consider the franchise relationship.
Yeah.
A dealer gets a report card quarterly, in some cases more often than that, about consumer satisfaction scores and service satisfaction scores, so that if a dealer seeks to acquire another dealership or relocate,
it's the first thing they look at.
something, they're judged based on the consumer satisfaction indices. So there's a whole host, and let's talk about, going back to the 1980s when that movie came out. Since that time, the internet has come on the scene, and any consumer who really wants to become educated as to whether they should do business with a particular dealer, this is not just franchise dealers, it's independent dealers. So this regulatory umbrella exists on such a widespread basis without the need for agencies like the Federal Trade Commission to add just another layer. Consider the internet, dealerrater.com, Yelp, Google, Facebook, cars.com.
That's right.
It's almost impossible for consumers not to be educated on whether they should do business with a particular dealer. And it's not just whether they get 5 stars or 4 stars. Dig deep, read about the business practices. I've seen dealers, particularly independent dealers, who are not, don't subscribe to the same notion of good faith. And you'll see the type of practices they engage in by just reading the comments from consumers. So there's very little that an honest dealer can do to skate the issue, to skate the regulatory rules. So this industry is well governed. It doesn't need all these extra layers, this venomous approach to the industry, and in the byproduct of that clearly is penalizing consumers.
That's right.
Because consumers don't have time to spend an extra hour or two to sign disclosure forms, and dealers don't have the budget to pass these. It's not fair because ultimately the consumer is going to pay for all the added costs of these compliance steps that need to be taken. So it's great news. Everyone's celebrating, not because we as an industry don't want to abide by the rules. We just don't want to be spending 3 and 4 and 5 hours delivering a single car and passing the cost of that on to the consumer when none of it is necessary given all of this regulatory and legal oversight that exists in the marketplace.
That's right. That's right. It's incredible. Hey, switching gears for a moment here, you represent dealers all over the country. Are you seeing any trends in 2025 that are different from the past few years? I know it's a very broad statement, but talk to us about some of the things that you're witnessing.
Well, it's interesting. No sooner did the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day pass. We're starting to, as lawyers, and I'll say this on behalf of the lawyers that do what I do. We tend to see things unfold even before you read about them, or you see interviews of people in the industry, whether they're bankers or brokers or floor planner. I'm seeing, and I know other attorneys that I speak with on a regular basis are seeing a picture that's not as rosy as is being portrayed. And it's almost fact sensitive to the franchise. So, well, of course, we're all reading about the good economic mood since the election, interest rates possibly getting a little bit lower, employment. All of the telltale signs are that 2025 should be a good year for the auto industry. 16 million sales, or 17 million sales. But, the devil's in the details. And I know that I'm getting I would say in the month of January, I probably have gotten 4 or 5 out of trust red flag calls from dealers.
Really?
Now, I haven't seen that in 5 years. On a consistent basis. And this is just in 1 month. And I've spoken to other attorneys to say, are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing?
Is that brand specific? And can we guess those brands?
It's brands.
Guess those brands?
Yeah. I mean, surely it's brand specific. I would also attribute it to coming off the high of the post-COVID. I mean, people have made money hand over fist, and I will tell you, if you dig deep, some dealers have spent that money.
That's right.
Whether it's buying other stores too quickly, or living large, buying a yacht, whatever it is, the pendulum swings dramatically in the auto industry, as you well know.
And we all think that it's here to stay. We all think that, okay, we're going to now start selling cars even when things normalize. We're going to start selling them at sticker price. Maybe not above, but we're going to sell everything. Consumers are okay with that. When in reality, that went back pretty quickly. Now it's a race to the bottom again.
Everyone compares it to 2019. Well, 2019 was much different than 2025.
Right.
That short 5 or 6 year period, has seen more players come onto the scene, right? You've seen Genesis, Tesla's expanded, Lucid, Rivian, other EVs. It's not the same environment, and it's no longer order taking. You've got to really operate the business intelligently.
Right.
And now you have, mixed in that, you have franchises that are sustaining losses and having whatever problems that they normally have, Infiniti, Nissan, Chrysler, Dodge vehicles, not so much the Ram or the Jeep, Mitsubishi, even Lincoln. The bloom is off the rose for a lot of these franchises. So, when you see general headlines that say 2025 is going to be a pretty good year, well, that's true if you're a Mercedes or a Porsche or, a Chevy or a Ford dealer, but not necessarily if you hold some of these other franchises. You've really got to tighten your belt and operate. And, we all know which franchises are suffering. So that's why I think we're seeing some problems with out of trust and defaults on paying like sales taxes and payroll withholding and union dues. I mean, these are the telltale signs of problems ahead. The difference, however, is I don't think it's emblematic of the entire industry. I just think there's going to be a shakeout of certain dealers that are holding certain brands. There are just, it's the same amount of food, but more people at the table eating that food.
Right. Do you think it's going to be a good year in the M&A market for dealers?
I think there are enough dealers who've said, you know what, I wanted to sell in 2021 because maybe I was, 75 years old, but I just couldn't sell because we were making too much money. So I say to those dealers, there's no shame in waiting. Yeah, maybe you're going to get a lot less blue sky, but you also banked a lot more money in the intervening 3 years. So you lost nothing really by selling. So I think what we're going to see now in 2025 are a lot of the buy sells that would have taken place 2 and 3 years ago. So they're coming to the forefront. And I think buyers have to be careful as well. There's always buyers. Always buyers for any franchise. So it's never that, a dealership is unsaleable.
Right.
But buyers are being more cautious. Also another change from 5 or 7 years ago, the buyer profile is so much different than it was back then. You have so much outside money from non-automotive, private family offices coming on to the scene.
That's right.
So the problem is not so much the buyers have to be more astute in valuing stores. And I always say to my clients that are buying, oh, this dealership is worth, it's worth $4 million. I just did the calculation. And I said, well, just keep this in mind. It's probably worth $4 million, but just like you, there might be 20 other people that are willing to pay that $4 million. Because there's a lot more buyers than there are sellers. So you might have to consider going up to 5 or 6 if you want to own this store. Brokers are very good at explaining, how they come up with these valuations. And the idea is, well, you want to make your return back in 5 years. And that's true if you're 65 and you're buying a store.
Sure.
But what if you're 42 years old?
Right.
Does it matter, really, if you make that money back in 5 years versus 9 years?
I agree. I've had this discussion with a number of people, and you're exactly right. I mean, can you, is it going to make that big a difference that those extra couple of $1 million that you're going to pay for the store in the long run? If you're going to keep that store and your family's going to end up running that store one day, and as we all know, you can make that back if you just make some tweaks in that dealership in the first couple of years, right?
Well, I hear it all the time. Well, yeah, this dealership, could be much more successful, but I don't want to pay for it with my own money. I said, no, that's where the opportunity is. Don't look at it in a negative light like that, especially if you do have children in the business, because 20 or 30 years when you're passing the torch to them, did it really matter? That extra $2 million or $3 million?
That's right.
It's lost in the process. So yes, of course you have to, use a benchmark. Otherwise, it's the Wild West. But the real buyers I find are the ones that know how to stretch within reason. Because otherwise you're just one of, it's like a first-time buyer buying a home now. You see what it's like in the market. There are 20 people bidding on, a $500,000 home.
No question.
Well, you don't want to be in that crowd. You want to set yourself apart by being a visionary.
No question about it. Len Bellavia, founding partner at Bellavia Blatt Lawyers, or I should say also known as the dealerlaw.com. So thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Your insights are invaluable to our dealer audience. So thank you so much.
Jim, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to the next time.
Great. Same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.